The sound Kayla Monroe would remember for the rest of her life wasn't a scream or a crash, or even the police sirens that would arrive minutes later. It was the precise click of Ryan Brooks's shoulder joint being manipulated to its absolute limit, held there by hands that hadn't forgotten 20 years of training, just because they'd spent 4 years folding laundry and swallowing. Humiliation. "You're hurting him," Kayla whispered from where she'd stumbled backward, her designer heels catching on the area rug Hannah had picked out 3 anniversaries ago. But even as the words left her mouth, Kayla knew how absurd they sounded. They'd hurt Hannah for months. Systematically, deliberately, they'd laughed about it. "Yes," Hannah said simply, her face wet with tears, her breathing controlled, her stance absolutely stable. "I am." Ryan's face was pressed against the hardwood floor of his own living room, the floor he'd walked across 100 times with Kayla on his arm, treating Hannah like furniture that had lost its appeal. He was making sounds now, whimpering noises that didn't match the confident, cruel man who'd blocked Hannah's path to the front door just 3 minutes earlier. 3 minutes. That's all it had taken for Hannah Brooks' carefully constructed silence to finally shatter. "Do something," Kayla shrieked, her red cocktail dress suddenly feeling ridiculous, her perfectly styled hair falling across her face as panic replaced the smug superiority she'd worn like armor. "Ryan, do something, fight back." But Ryan couldn't fight back, because the woman they'd spent months calling too weak to matter had him in a hold that professional wrestlers spent years learning to escape, and most never did. Hannah's internal voice was eerily calm, a stark contrast to the chaos erupting around her. "Breathe. 2 counts in, 4 counts out. Maintain position, don't overcorrect. Don't use more force than necessary." The words were Coach Dana's, echoing from a lifetime ago when Hannah's world was measured in takedowns and pin times, instead of how many insults she could endure before breakfast. "You said she was fragile." Kayla gasped, her voice breaking as she watched Ryan's free hands slap weakly against the floor. "You said she'd never fight back. You told me she was too weak." Ryan tried to answer, tried to salvage some shred of the dominance he'd built his entire marriage on. But when he opened his mouth, all that emerged was a sharp cry as Hannah's grip adjusted precisely, economically, the way someone moves when they know exactly which angle creates compliance without causing permanent damage. Kayla's mind was reeling, trying to reconcile the broken, invisible woman she'd mocked for months with this person, standing in perfect wrestler's stance, weight distributed, center of gravity low, completely in control, while tears streamed down her face. This wasn't rage. This wasn't wild, emotional violence. This was discipline, technique, years of training that Hannah's gentleness had hidden but never erased. "I asked you," Hannah said, her voice barely above a whisper, each word carrying the weight of 4 years of swallowed dignity. "I asked you to just see me, to just respect me in my own home." Her grip tightened fractionally, not enough to break, just enough to remind. "But you brought her here and told her I was nothing. You laughed and said I was too weak to stop you." The distant wail of sirens was growing closer. Hannah had called them herself, using the phone that was still on the kitchen counter, calmly reporting a domestic disturbance at her own address before Ryan had even understood what was happening. Kayla was crying now, her back pressed against the wall, staring at Hannah like she was seeing a stranger. And she was. Because the Hannah Brooks she thought she knew, the one who served them coffee with trembling hands, who cleaned up after their date nights, who disappeared into her own walls that Hannah had never really existed. She was a choice, a deliberate construction, an act of restraint that Ryan and Kayla had mistaken for weakness. "Who are you?" Kayla breathed. Hannah's eyes met hers, and for just a moment, Kayla saw something that made her blood run cold. Not violence, not cruelty, just capability. Pure, undeniable capability that had been choosing mercy for 4 years until mercy was no longer an option. "I'm exactly who I've always been," Hannah said quietly. "You just never asked." The sirens were on their street now, red and blue lights beginning to flash through the front windows. Ryan had stopped struggling, his body gone limp in defeat or self-preservation, or the simple biological understanding that he'd lost control he'd never actually had in the first place. Hannah's hands were steady, her breathing was controlled. And as the police knocked on the door she'd walked through as a bride 4 years ago, she realized something that should have terrified her but instead felt like relief. She'd been living in a cage she'd built herself, and Ryan had just handed her the key by finally, fatally pushing her too far. But to understand how Hannah Brooks ended up standing here, in her Cleveland living room, with her husband immobilized on the floor, and his mistress frozen in shock against the wall, we have to go back 4 years earlier, before she learned how dangerous silence could be. Back to the moment she met a man who saw her gentleness and mistook it for something he could exploit. 4 years earlier, Hannah Brooks stood in the locker room of the Ohio State Athletic Center, staring at her right shoulder in the mirror like it belonged to someone else. The ice pack was doing nothing. The pain medication was doing nothing. The doctor's words from 3 hours ago were doing everything. Career-ending, irreversible damage, competitive athletics no longer advisable. She was 26 years old, a 3-time state champion, ranked 5th in her weight class nationally, and her body had just told her the fight was over. Hannah. Coach Dana Reeves appeared in the doorway, her weathered face carrying the kind of concern that came from 20 years of watching young athletes break themselves for glory. "Talk to me." "There's nothing to say." Hannah kept staring at the mirror, at the woman wearing a Cleveland State wrestling hoodie who would never wear it in competition again. "It's done. Your shoulder's done. You're not." Hannah finally turned to face her coach, the woman who'd taught her everything from basic stance to the psychology of dominance, who'd turned a shy 12-year-old into someone who could control opponents twice her size. "I put Marcus Chen in the hospital last week." "That was an accident. The ref cleared you." "I felt his elbow dislocate, coach." Hannah's voice was hollow. "I felt it happen, and for just a second before I let go, I thought, good. He deserves this for that cheap shot in the second period." "What kind of person thinks that?" Dana moved closer, her voice dropping. "The kind who's been fighting since she was barely a teenager. The kind who's exhausted." "Hannah, you don't have to quit everything just because your shoulder quit you." "Yes, I do." Hannah grabbed her gym bag, the one with her name embroidered on it from a sponsorship deal that would evaporate by next week. "I'm tired, coach. I'm tired of hurting people. I'm tired of being the person who hurts people. I want to be someone gentle, someone normal." "Walking away from your strength doesn't make you safe," Dana said quietly. "It just means you'll forget who you are when you need to remember most." But Hannah was already leaving, walking out of the athletic center, and toward a life where her hands would never again be registered weapons, where her body would be soft instead of strategic, where she could be the kind of woman someone could love without fear. 3 months later, she met Ryan Brooks at a charity fundraiser in downtown Cleveland. Hannah was there volunteering, helping set up the silent auction tables because it was the kind of thing normal, gentle women did. She arranged gift baskets and wine bottles and tried not to calculate how easily she could dislocate the shoulder of the man who kept making inappropriate comments to the younger volunteers. Ryan was there networking, working the room with the kind of easy confidence that made people trust him before they should. He was handsome in that generic, safe way, good suit, good smile, good handshake. When he approached the volunteer table where Hannah was reorganizing donation cards, his opening line was refreshingly direct. "I've been watching you for 20 minutes, and I can't figure out if you're incredibly patient or incredibly bored." Hannah looked up, surprised into a genuine smile. "Little of both?" "Honest, I like that." He extended his hand. "Ryan Brooks, and you are?" "Hannah." She shook his hand, noting that his grip was firm but not aggressive, confident but not testing. "Normal. Safe. Hannah Reese." They talked for 15 minutes about nothing important, the fundraiser, the weather, Cleveland sports teams. Ryan was charming without being overwhelming, interested without being intrusive. When he asked for her number, Hannah felt something in her chest lift for the first time since the injury. Maybe this was what life after wrestling looked like. Maybe this was her reward for choosing gentleness. Their first date was coffee, safe in public. Their second was dinner at a restaurant with cloth napkins and wine she couldn't pronounce. Ryan asked about her life, and Hannah gave him the edited version. Former athlete, career-ending injury, trying to figure out what came next. "What sport?" Ryan asked. Hannah hesitated. "Wrestling." His eyebrows rose. "Seriously? Wow. You don't look like a wrestler." It should have been a compliment. Hannah chose to hear it as one. "I wasn't very good," she lied, testing how it felt to rewrite her own history. Ryan seemed relieved by this, though Hannah couldn't understand why. "Well, that chapter's closed now, right? On to better things." "Right," Hannah agreed. "Better things." Over the next 8 months, Ryan became her proof that she'd successfully transformed into someone new. He liked that she was quiet, that she didn't cause drama, that she fit easily into his life without demanding too much space. When he introduced her to his colleagues, he called her sweet and easygoing, and Hannah told herself these were the qualities that mattered more than the championships gathering dust in her parents' attic. The proposal came during a weekend trip to Columbus, a surprise, a restaurant Hannah had mentioned once in passing, a ring that was slightly too small but she'd never say so. Ryan knelt, told her she was the most uncomplicated woman he'd ever met, and asked her to marry him. Hannah said yes, because she'd worked so hard to become uncomplicated, because normal women married men like Ryan, because she'd buried the wrestler deep enough that even she was starting to forget where the grave was. The wedding was small, tasteful, and Hannah's former teammates were notably absent. Coach Dana sent a card that read simply, "I hope he deserves you." Hannah filed it away and chose to believe he would. She was wrong. The first year of marriage to Ryan Brooks was fine. Not happy, but fine. Not passionate, but fine. Not particularly connected, but fine. Hannah had spent so long redefining herself that she'd forgotten what she actually needed from a relationship beyond the absence of violence and the presence of predictability. Ryan worked long hours at his sales job, climbing the corporate ladder with single-minded focus. Hannah worked part-time at a community center, teaching basic fitness classes to people who would never know she'd once pinned a nationally ranked opponent in 43 seconds. They existed in the same three-bedroom house in Cleveland's western suburbs, like roommates with shared finances and occasional physical intimacy. Fine became Hannah's most used word. How was your day? Fine. How are you feeling? Fine. Is everything okay? Fine. But fine was slowly becoming something else, and Hannah couldn't name it yet because she'd trained herself not to see patterns of dominance. When Ryan corrected her at dinner parties, "Actually, Hannah, that's not what happened," she told herself he had a better memory. When he rearranged the groceries she'd put away, "This is more efficient, babe," she told herself he was helping. When he started sentences with "no offense," but always followed by offense, she told herself he was just being honest. "You know what I like about you?" Ryan said one evening, 6 months into their marriage. They were on the couch, him scrolling through his phone, her reading a book she'd been trying to finish for 3 weeks. "You're not difficult. My ex was always starting arguments about everything. You just go with the flow." Hannah looked up from her book. "Is that a compliment?" "Of course it is." Ryan didn't look up from his screen. "Most women your age are always demanding attention, making everything about them. You're just easy to be with." Easy. Hannah turned the word over in her mind, trying to decide if it felt good or terrible. She settled on fine. The erosion of respect was so gradual that Hannah didn't notice she was disappearing. When Ryan's mother, Linda, visited for Sunday dinners, Hannah would cook elaborate meals that Linda would critique with surgical precision, while Ryan said nothing. "Well, it's a bit dry, dear, but I suppose not everyone has a gift for cooking." Hannah would smile and say nothing, because conflict wasn't part of her new identity. Ryan started making jokes about her to his friends. Small things, casual things, things that cut just enough to remind her of her place, but not enough to warrant objection. Hannah's not really into complex movies. She prefers the simple stuff. Hannah's terrible with money, so I handle all that. Hannah's not exactly the intellectual type. Each comment was a tiny theft of her dignity, so small she couldn't call it abuse without seeming dramatic. And Hannah hated drama. The wrestler in her, the one who understood dominance and submission, tried to surface occasionally with warnings, but Hannah pushed her back down. That woman was violent. That woman hurt people. This new Hannah was gentle, and gentleness meant enduring. By their second anniversary, Ryan had stopped asking Hannah's opinion on anything that mattered. Vacation plans, furniture purchases, social commitments, he made the decisions and informed her afterward. When she tried to voice a preference, he'd sigh with the patience of someone explaining basics to a child. "Hannah, I've already researched this. Trust me." She did trust him. That was the problem. The house that had briefly felt like theirs became his, and Hannah became increasingly aware that she was living in someone else's space. Ryan would walk past her without acknowledgement, talk over her when she spoke, reference conversations she wasn't part of with friends she'd never met. When they had sex, increasingly rare, increasingly mechanical, he never asked what she wanted. Afterward, he'd roll over and fall asleep, while Hannah stared at the ceiling, trying to remember when she'd agreed to become invisible. One night, Hannah tried to initiate a conversation about their marriage. Ryan, I feel like we're not really connecting anymore. Like we're just cohabiting. He looked at her with genuine confusion. What are you talking about? Everything's fine. I don't think it is. I think maybe we need to. Hannah, he cut her off with the tone he'd use on a telemarketer. You're overthinking. You always do this. Create problems where there aren't any. Can we please just have one evening without you being needy? Needy. The word landed like a slap. Hannah closed her mouth and returned to being fine. Ryan's entitlement grew in proportion to Hannah's silence. He stopped clearing his dishes, expecting her to handle it. He stopped asking if she had plans, assuming her time was flexible. He stopped pretending to care about her day, her thoughts, her existence beyond the ways it served him. And Hannah let him. Because the alternative was becoming the woman she used to be, the one who didn't accept disrespect, who demanded dignity, who understood that silence was a choice she could unmake at any moment. But unmaking that choice meant remembering she had power. And Hannah had spent 3 years trying to forget. So she stayed silent. She stayed small. She stayed fine. Until Ryan brought home proof that fine was never going to be enough. Ryan met Kayla Monroe at a sales conference in Cincinnati on a Tuesday that would become the fulcrum of 3 lives. Hannah would later realize the exact date mattered because Ryan's personality changed so immediately, so dramatically, that she could pinpoint the moment he found someone who made her obsolete. Kayla was everything Hannah had deliberately stopped being: loud, confident, aggressively ambitious, the kind of woman who walked into rooms like she owned them, and usually did by the time she left. She was Ryan's new colleague, transferred from the Chicago office to shake up the Cleveland sales team's complacent culture. Ryan came home from the conference lit up in ways Hannah hadn't seen since their engagement. You should have seen her presentation, he said, not greeting Hannah, barely acknowledging she existed. Absolutely destroyed the competition. This woman is exactly what our department needs. Hannah was folding laundry in the living room. That's nice. I'm glad the conference was productive. Productive? Ryan laughed. It was transformative. Kayla has this energy, this drive. She makes everyone around her better. He finally looked at Hannah, and something in his expression made her stomach drop. It was comparison, assessment, disappointment. Within 2 weeks, Ryan was mentioning Kayla constantly. Kayla thinks our approach is outdated. Kayla has this strategy that could triple our revenue. Kayla says most people are too comfortable to actually succeed. Each mention was a small plan, indictment of Hannah's entire existence. The emotional affair was obvious to everyone except Ryan, who convinced himself it was merely professional admiration. He started working late, always with Kayla, started dressing better, impressing Kayla, started viewing his home life as the obstacle keeping him from his real life, the one where Kayla saw him as impressive instead of ordinary. Hannah tried to address it once. Ryan, you've been spending a lot of time with this Kayla person. Her name is just Kayla, Ryan corrected. And yes, we're working on a major project. Some of us have actual career ambitions. The implication was clear, unlike you. 3 months after Cincinnati, Ryan came home smelling like perfume that wasn't sold at any store Hannah shopped at. His collar had lipstick barely visible, but Hannah had spent years analyzing opponents' body mechanics. She could spot details others missed. Long day? She asked quietly. Yeah. Kayla and I were celebrating. We landed the Riverside account. He moved past her toward the bedroom, already pulling off his shirt. Don't wait up. I need to prep for tomorrow's presentation. That night, Hannah lay awake listening to Ryan's phone buzz repeatedly in the other room. She didn't check it. She didn't confront him. She made herself small and silent and told herself she was choosing peace, not cowardice. The first time Kayla entered their home, Hannah felt it before she saw it, the shift in air pressure when a predator enters territory they plan to claim. It was a Saturday afternoon. Hannah was in the kitchen making lunch when she heard Ryan's key in the lock, followed by a second voice. Female. Confident. Laughing at something Ryan had said. And I told him there's no way I'm settling for the Cleveland standard when I can set a new one, Kayla was saying as they walked in. She stopped when she saw Hannah, and her smile didn't falter. It sharpened. Oh, Kayla said, her eyes traveling from Hannah's bare feet to her casual clothes to her makeup-free face. You must be Hannah. Ryan's told me so much about you. The emphasis on so much somehow conveyed so little that matters. Ryan didn't introduce them properly. Hannah, this is Kayla. We're going to work in my office for a few hours. Nice to meet you, Hannah said, her voice automatically soft. Can I get you something to drink? Kayla's smile was permission and pity mixed. No, thank you. We have everything we need. They disappeared into Ryan's home office, and Hannah stood in the kitchen listening to them laugh low, intimate sounds that didn't exist between coworkers. At one point, she heard Kayla say, "You're wasted in this life, Ryan. You should be running the whole company, not reporting to idiots." And Ryan replied, "Maybe with the right partner I could." Hannah's hands stopped moving on the sandwich she was making. Her breathing changed, deepened, the way it used to before a match when she'd assess her opponent's weaknesses and plan 17 moves ahead. But she caught herself, forced her shoulders down, returned to being the woman who didn't fight. When Kayla left 3 hours later, she paused at the front door and looked back at Hannah with something that wasn't quite sympathy. "You're lucky to have him," she said. "I hope you know that." The subtext was clear. "I'm going to take him, and you're too weak to stop me." Ryan closed the door and immediately started talking about how impressive Kayla was, how ambitious, how different from the usual Cleveland mentality. He didn't say different from you, but Hannah heard it anyway. That night, Ryan slept in the guest room. He claimed it was because Hannah's allergies were bad and he needed rest for a morning meeting. But they both knew the truth. He was already gone. They were just waiting for his body to catch up with his heart. And somewhere in a downtown Cleveland apartment, Kayla Monroe was texting Ryan. "She seems sweet, harmless." Ryan replied, "She is. Don't worry about her. She's too weak to be a problem." Kayla Monroe became a fixture in Hannah's home so gradually that by the time Hannah recognized the invasion, the occupation was complete. It started with afternoon work sessions, then progressed to dinners Ryan would announce with 30 minutes notice. Then evolved into Kayla, showing up unannounced on weekends because she was in the neighborhood. She was never in the neighborhood. She lived 20 minutes away, in the opposite direction. "Ryan," Hannah tried once, keeping her voice carefully neutral. "I'd appreciate a heads up when we're having company. I would have cleaned up, prepared something." "It's not company, Hannah. It's my colleague." Ryan didn't look up from his laptop. "And the house is fine. Stop making everything a production." But it wasn't fine. Kayla would walk through Hannah's living room like she was conducting an inspection, commenting on decor choices with backhanded observations. "Oh, interesting choice with the curtains. Very traditional." She'd sit on Hannah's couch, drink from Hannah's glasses, and once memorably rearrange the throw pillows because the symmetry was bothering me. Ryan watched it all and said nothing. The real shift came when Ryan announced Kayla would be staying with him, temporarily, while her apartment underwent renovations. He presented this as decided fact, not a discussion. "For how long?" Hannah asked. "I don't know. A week. Maybe 2. Does it matter?" Yes. It mattered more than Hannah had words for. But the woman she'd trained herself to be didn't make demands, didn't create conflict, didn't claim territory. So she said, "I guess not." Kayla moved into the guest bedroom with enough luggage to suggest her temporary renovations might be permanent. She immediately began treating Hannah like staff in her own home. "Hannah, could you grab me a towel?" "Hannah, do we have any decent coffee or just this grocery store stuff?" "Hannah, could you move your things? I need to use the kitchen." Your things. The kitchen. As if Hannah's ownership of her own home was negotiable. Ryan not only allowed this, he participated. When Hannah set the table for dinner, he'd rearrange it. Kayla prefers her silverware on the right. When Hannah suggested movie options, he'd defer to Kayla. "What do you want to watch?" Hannah's taste is pretty basic. The humiliation wasn't loud or dramatic. It was constant, ambient. A low-level assault on Hannah's dignity that happened in small moments that individually seemed too petty to protest. But collectively, they told Hannah a story she could no longer ignore. She was disappearing inside her own life, and the two people causing it were laughing. One evening, Hannah heard them in the living room after she'd gone to bed early, a tactical retreat when the mocking became too much. She stood in the hallway, listening. "I don't understand why you don't just leave her," Kayla said. "She's clearly miserable. You're clearly miserable. Just end it." "It's not that simple." Ryan's voice carried none of the impatience he used with Hannah. "There's the house, the finances, the hassle." "The hassle," Kayla repeated. "You mean she'd fight you?" Ryan laughed, actually laughed. "Hannah, No, she doesn't fight. About anything. That's kind of the problem. She just exists. No passion, no fire. She's harmless. Hannah's hands formed fists without her conscious decision. Her breathing changed. Old instincts stirred like sediment at the bottom of a lake, disturbed after years of stillness. But she forced herself to relax, to return to bed, to be the harmless woman they believed she was. The breaking point came on a Sunday evening. Hannah had spent the day at her parents' house, giving herself space from the suffocation of Kayla's presence. When she returned at 6, she found Kayla and Ryan in the kitchen cooking dinner together, laughing, touching, inhabiting her space like she was the guest in her own home. "We're making stir-fry," Ryan announced, as if Hannah had asked. "Hope you're hungry." Hannah set down her purse, something in her chest tightening. "I was planning to make dinner." "Well, we got hungry," Kayla said with a shrug. "You weren't here." "I wasn't here because you are." But Hannah didn't say it. She went to the bedroom, closed the door, and allowed herself 3 minutes of silent tears before washing her face and returning downstairs to eat a meal in her own kitchen while feeling like an intruder. After dinner, Hannah tried to leave. Not dramatically, not with announcements, she just wanted to go for a walk, to breathe air that didn't taste like her own humiliation. She grabbed her jacket from the hall closet and headed for the front door. Ryan intercepted her. "Where are you going?" "For a walk." "Now?" He positioned himself between Hannah and the door, not overtly blocking her but making his body an obstacle. "It's late." "It's 7:30. I need you here. Kayla and I are going to watch a movie, and it would be weird if you just left." His voice carried an edge Hannah hadn't heard before. Not anger, but something worse, ownership. "Ryan, I just need some air." "Hannah." He stepped closer, and Hannah's body recognized threat before her mind did. Her weight shifted infinitesimally, her center of gravity dropping, her balance adjusting to compensate for proximity to potential aggression. "You're being difficult. Just stay home for once without making it a thing." Behind him, Kayla watched from the living room doorway with undisguised satisfaction. Hannah's old training whispered assessments she'd spent years silencing. His stance is too narrow. His balance is forward. He's never defended against someone who knows what they're doing. You could control him in 3 seconds. 2 if you committed. But she didn't. She forced herself to relax, to smile, to say, "You're right, sorry. I'll stay." Ryan's expression softened into something worse than anger, approval for her compliance. "Thank you. Now come watch the movie with us." Hannah followed them into the living room, sat in her own chair, and watched Kayla curl up next to Ryan on the couch where Hannah used to sit. She lasted 40 minutes before excusing herself to bed, where she lay in darkness with her hands pressed flat against her sides to keep them from shaking. She was choosing restraint. She was choosing peace. But somewhere deep in the muscle memory she'd tried to erase, a wrestler's instinct was waking up and calculating exactly how much force it would take to make Ryan understand what a mistake he'd made. Not yet, though. Not yet. Number Chapter 6. The Line. The moment arrived on a Tuesday evening with the casual cruelty of something long rehearsed. Hannah was in the kitchen when Ryan called from the living room. Not a request, a summons. When she entered, she found them arranged like a portrait of her replacement. Ryan on the couch with his arm across Kayla's shoulders, Kayla wearing one of Hannah's cardigans. "We need to talk," Ryan said, and Kayla smiled. "Kayla's staying here permanently." Not asking, informing. It doesn't make sense for her to find another place when she's here most of the time anyway. "This is my house too," Hannah said quietly. "Actually, it's my house. My name on the mortgage. You contributed what, decorative pillows?" Ryan's tone was patient in that way that precedes cruelty. "You have 2 options. Stay and accept things as they are, or leave." "Don't be dramatic," Kayla added from the couch. "Ryan's being generous. Most men would just kick you out." Hannah saw it then, the absolute confidence that she would fold, disappear, accept this because she'd accepted everything else. They'd calculated her capacity for endurance and determined it was infinite. "I want you both to leave," Hannah said. "Now." Ryan laughed, genuinely amused, the laugh of a man who'd never faced consequences. "Or what, Hannah? What are you going to do?" Hannah moved toward the front door. Ryan intercepted her, his hand closing around her wrist. Not gently, a grip meant to stop her, to establish that his will superseded her movement. "Let go," Hannah said. "Sit down." Ryan's grip tightened. We're not done talking. The restraint Hannah had maintained for 4 years shattered. The wrestler she'd buried, the woman who understood control and leverage and exactly how much pressure it takes, surfaced completely. Hannah's free hand moved with precise economy, capturing Ryan's wrist. Her thumb found the pressure point between his radius and ulna, applying force with the calm focus of someone who'd done this 10,000 times and never forgot the muscle memory. Ryan's grip released involuntarily. Hannah used that half-second of confusion to pivot, redirect his momentum, and guide his shoulder joint into a position that was suddenly, unmistakably vulnerable. Before he could process what was happening, Hannah swept his legs, a basic technique she'd learned at 12. Not aggressive, not violent, just physics and anatomy, and 4 years of restraint ending in one controlled motion. Ryan was on the floor. Not thrown, not slammed, placed there with precision that only comes from years of training. Hannah maintained control of his arm, positioning it behind his back at an angle that was uncomfortable but not damaging. "Stop! You're hurting me!" Ryan's voice came out higher, confused. "Yes," Hannah said simply. Tears streamed down her face, but her hands were steady. "I am." Kayla scrambled off the couch, cycling through disbelief and fear. "What the hell? Ryan, do something." "He can't," Hannah said, not looking at Kayla. "His shoulder is in mechanical disadvantage. If he struggles, he'll dislocate it. He needs to be still." "Ryan told me you were weak," Kayla's voice cracked. "He said you were too pathetic to fight back." "He said I was too weak," Hannah finished, her voice calm despite the tears. "He was wrong. I was never weak, Kayla. I was choosing not to hurt him. There's a difference." Ryan tried to move. Hannah adjusted her grip infinitesimally, and he whimpered. "Please, Hannah, please stop." "I begged you," Hannah said quietly. "For months. I begged you to see me, to respect me, to stop humiliating me in my own home. Did you stop?" Silence, except for Ryan's labored breathing. "Did you stop?" Hannah repeated, applying slightly more pressure. "No," Ryan managed. "No, I didn't." Hannah released him and stepped back in one smooth motion, her body immediately assuming a defensive stance, weight distributed, balance low. Ryan scrambled backward, cradling his arm, staring at his wife like she was a stranger. Which she was. He'd never actually met the real her. Kayla rushed to Ryan's side. "We need to call the police. She attacked you." "Good idea," Hannah said, reaching for her phone. Her hands were still steady. "I'll call them." "Why would you call them? You just assaulted him." "I defended myself from unwanted physical contact," Hannah corrected, already dialing. "Ryan grabbed me first. There's a difference." She pressed the phone to her ear. "Yes? Hello? I need to report a domestic disturbance at 2847 Maple Drive. My husband physically prevented me from leaving when I asked him and his girlfriend to exit my home. I've restrained him until police arrive." "Yes, I'll stay on the line." Ryan and Kayla stared at Hannah like she'd revealed herself to be something they'd never imagined. Not violent, not out of control, but competent, capable. Dangerous in the way that disciplined people are always more dangerous than angry ones. "You're going to regret this," Ryan said, but his voice carried none of its usual authority. Hannah wiped tears from her face. "Tell them whatever you want, but Coach Dana always said the truth comes out eventually, especially when someone underestimates who they're dealing with." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Hannah sat down carefully, phone still pressed to her ear, and waited. She'd spent 4 years making herself small, silent, safe. But safety, she now understood, wasn't the same as surrender. And Ryan Brooks had just learned the difference. The Cleveland Police Department's interview room was designed for intimidation. Gray walls, fluorescent lighting, a cold metal table where Hannah sat with her hands folded. Her wedding ring caught the harsh light as officers Martinez and Chen reviewed their notes. "Mrs. Brooks," Officer Martinez began, voice professionally neutral, "your husband claims you attacked him without provocation, that you've been emotionally unstable for months." Hannah had expected this. Ryan had never faced real consequences. Of course he'd reconstruct reality to protect himself. That's not what happened. Then what did happen? Hannah took a breath, organizing her thoughts the way Coach Dana had taught her before tournaments. Chronologically, factually, without emotion. "My husband has been having an affair with Kayla Monroe. She's been living in our home for 3 weeks. Tonight, they informed me she was moving in permanently and I could either accept it or leave. When I tried to leave, Ryan grabbed my wrist to prevent me from exiting. I removed his hand using defensive techniques and restrained him until I could call 911. Officer Chen looked up from his notes. Defensive techniques? Here it was the moment where her past would either save or condemn her. I was a competitive wrestler, state champion 3 times, nationally ranked. I know how to control someone without injuring them. The officers exchanged a glance. You have martial arts training? Wrestling training. There's a difference. Hannah met their eyes steadily. Everything I did was defensive and controlled. Ryan grabbed me first. I responded with minimal force necessary to protect myself and de-escalate. Then I called you. Officer Martinez wrote something down. Your husband says you broke his jaw. I didn't touch his jaw. I controlled his shoulder and arm. If he's claiming jaw injury, you should check when and how that occurred. Hannah paused. I'm trained in leverage and joint manipulation. If I'd wanted to break something, I would have. I wanted to restrain, not harm. There's a difference. That's a very specific distinction. I've spent 20 years learning that distinction. The interview continued for another hour. Questions about the marriage, Kayla's presence, previous conflicts. Hannah answered everything truthfully, her voice never wavering, her story never changing. She didn't embellish. She stated facts. Meanwhile, in another interview room, Ryan's story shifted under questioning. First, Hannah attacked unprovoked. Then maybe he'd touched her shoulder. Then perhaps his hand was on her arm, but only to stop her from leaving because she was hysterical. So you did prevent her from leaving? Officer Chen asked. I know, I was just trying to talk to her. By grabbing her wrist? It wasn't grabbing, it was, Ryan faltered. The script in his head was collapsing under scrutiny. She overreacted. I barely touched her. So you did touch her. Look, the point is she attacked me. I'm the victim here. But Ryan's injuries told a different story. The paramedics' report showed minor bruising, consistent with controlled restraint, no broken bones, no signs of striking or aggressive force. His shoulder was tender but functional. His jaw, which he'd claimed was broken, was fine. When pressed, Ryan admitted he might have hit it on the floor when he fell. Kayla's interview was even more revealing. She started confidently, backing Ryan's narrative that Hannah was unstable. But Officer Martinez was patient, asking questions that required specific details Kayla hadn't prepared for. How long have you lived in the Brooks home? I'm not living there. I'm staying temporarily. How long? 3 weeks. Did Mrs. Brooks invite you to stay? Kayla hesitated. Ryan invited me. And Mrs. Brooks agreed? The pause was damning. She didn't object. That's not the same as agreeing, is it? Officer Martinez leaned forward. Miss Monroe, did you and Mr. Brooks inform Mrs. Brooks tonight that you were moving in permanently? Another pause, longer. Ryan was going to discuss it with her. While you were present? And how did Mrs. Brooks respond? Kayla looked at the table. She asked us to leave. And then what happened? Ryan, he tried to stop her from leaving. Physically? Yes, I guess. But she didn't have to attack him. Ryan said she was too weak to fight back. He said she was harmless. Officer Martinez underlined something in her notes. He told you she was too weak to defend herself? Kayla realized her mistake too late. That's not I meant. You meant that Mr. Brooks told you his wife wouldn't resist him physically preventing her from leaving her own home? Silence. Over the next 3 days, the investigation expanded. Hannah provided contact information for Coach Dana Reeves, who arrived at the police station with 20 years of documentation. Competition records, training logs, certifications in wrestling instruction that included extensive safety protocols. Hannah Brooks is one of the most disciplined athletes I've ever trained, Coach Dana told the investigators, her weathered face serious. She walked away from wrestling specifically because she was uncomfortable with the level of force she could generate. Everything she did was about control, not violence. If she restrained someone, it was because she chose restraint. Medical experts reviewed the photos of Ryan's injuries and confirmed the bruising patterns were consistent with controlled joint manipulation, not striking. The positioning indicated someone with professional-level understanding of human anatomy and leverage points. Nothing about Hannah's actions suggested loss of control or intent to harm beyond what was necessary for self-defense. Ryan's attorney tried to argue that Hannah's wrestling background made her the aggressor by default, a trained weapon, who should have de-escalated verbally. But the prosecution's response was devastating. Mr. Brooks grabbed her first. His size advantage was significant. His explicit statements to Miss Monroe that his wife was too weak to fight back demonstrate premeditation of dominance. Mrs. Brooks responded with exactly the level of force necessary. That's not assault. That's self-defense. By day 4, Kayla cracked completely. In a third interview, without Ryan present, she admitted, "He told me she was pathetic, that she'd never stand up to him, that we could do whatever we wanted because she was too weak to matter." I believed him. I mocked her. I wore her clothes. I rearranged her house. I thought she was nothing. "And now?" Officer Martinez asked quietly. Kayla's hands trembled. "Now I know he was wrong. About everything." Ryan's narrative collapsed entirely when security footage from a neighbor's doorbell camera captured audio of the confrontation through an open window. Ryan's voice clear and aggressive. "Sit down. We're not done talking." Hannah's voice quiet and steady. "Let go." Then sounds of brief struggle. And Hannah's controlled statement. "His shoulder is in mechanical disadvantage. If he struggles, he'll dislocate it." Not a threat. An anatomical fact. The district attorney declined to press charges against Hannah. Instead, they filed charges against Ryan for unlawful restraint and domestic intimidation. The evidence was overwhelming. His lies were documented. His intent was recorded. And most damning, his own words to Kayla had revealed his mindset. He'd believed his wife was too weak to defend herself, and he'd acted on that assumption. When Officer Martinez delivered the news to Hannah, she was sitting in her parents' living room in Columbus, where she'd stayed since the incident. "You're clear, Mrs. Brooks. No charges. And there's a temporary restraining order against your husband. He can't contact you or come within 500 feet. Hannah nodded slowly. "Thank you." "For what it's worth," Officer Martinez added, "I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've seen a lot of domestic situations. What you did, the control, the discipline, the way you de-escalated, that saved everyone in that room from something much worse." After the officer left, Hannah sat alone with her hands in her lap, the same hands that had once held championship trophies and had more recently folded laundry and now had defended her when nothing else would. Coach Dana's words from 4 years ago echoed, "Walking away from your strength doesn't make you safe." Hannah had learned the hard way. But she'd also learned something else. Strength wasn't just about physical capability. It was about knowing when to use it, how much to use, and most importantly, having the discipline to stop when enough was enough. Ryan had mistaken her restraint for weakness. That mistake had cost him his marriage, his credibility, and his illusion of control. Hannah had mistaken her silence for peace. That mistake had cost her 4 years. But now, finally, the truth was clear to everyone, including her. The divorce papers arrived on a Thursday, delivered to her parents' house where Hannah had been living for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of sleeping in her childhood bedroom, rebuilding herself in quiet spaces between who she'd been and who she'd tried to become. Hannah signed them in her father's study, her mother watching from the doorway with careful parental concern. "You don't have to do this quickly," her mother said. "You could contest some of his demands." "I don't want the house," Hannah interrupted gently. "I don't want anything that requires me to keep fighting him. I just want it done." Her father finally spoke. "You're entitled to half of everything. I'm entitled to peace. The rest is just furniture." Ryan's attorney had pushed a narrative where Hannah was the aggressor, where her wrestling background made her dangerous, but the evidence was too clear. In the end, Ryan settled for a clean divorce. Hannah took her car, her personal belongings, and walked away from a marriage that had been dead long before it was legally dissolved. The restraining order remained. Ryan sent exactly 2 text messages before his attorney told him to stop, both claiming Hannah had ruined his life. She'd blocked his number and never responded. Some people will never understand that defending yourself isn't an attack. Kayla had disappeared from Ryan's life 3 days after the incident, transferring back to Chicago and leaving Ryan with a shattered reputation. Hannah felt nothing about this, not satisfaction, not vindication. Just the hollow echo of consequences. 2 months after signing the papers, Hannah returned to the house on Maple Drive one final time. Ryan had moved out. Hannah had the locks changed and spent an afternoon walking through rooms that had never felt like home. The living room where the confrontation happened looked smaller. The kitchen where she'd made countless meals felt utilitarian, stripped of meaning. The bedroom where she'd slept alone for a year was just a room, 4 walls, and a window, nothing more. Hannah packed methodically. Clothes, Books, photos from before Ryan. She left the furniture, kitchen supplies, decorative pillows Ryan had once mocked. She left the bed, the couch where Kayla had sat with entitlement, the dining table where Hannah had served people who saw her as staff. She left it all because taking it would mean believing it had value. The only valuable thing in this house was the lesson. Making yourself small doesn't protect you from people who want to make you smaller. It just gives them more room. In the back of the closet, behind winter coats, Hannah found something she'd forgotten. Her last wrestling medal, from the state championship 3 years before she quit. She'd boxed up the others, but this one had survived, and finding it now felt like recovering a piece of herself. Hannah held the medal, reading the inscription. First place, 130 pounds, Women's Freestyle Wrestling, Ohio State Championship. She'd earned this by controlling an opponent favored to win. Not by overpowering her, but by being more disciplined, more patient, more willing to wait for the right moment. That skill hadn't left her. It had just been waiting. Hannah packed the medal with her other possessions and carried everything to her car in 3 trips. No moving truck, no ceremony. Just a woman loading her life into a Honda Civic and driving away. The final walkthrough was surreal. Hannah stood in the empty living room, the same room where she'd stood 2 months ago, with Ryan on the floor, and tried to feel something. Anger, sadness, regret. But all she felt was tired. Bone-deep tired from carrying something heavy for so long that she'd forgotten what standing straight felt like. She locked the door, dropped the keys in the mailbox, and walked to her car without looking back. Some chapters don't deserve dramatic endings. They just deserve to end. Her mother was waiting at home with dinner and carefully cheerful conversation about anything except Ryan or the marriage. Hannah appreciated the effort, even though the careful avoidance was exhausting. After dinner, she excused herself to her bedroom and sat on the bed she'd slept in through high school. Her phone buzzed. Coach Dana, heard the divorce is final. How are you holding up? Hannah typed and deleted 3 responses before settling on truth. I don't know yet, but I'm holding up. Coach Dana, that's all anyone can do. Let me know when you're ready to talk about what comes next. What came next? Hannah hadn't let herself think that far ahead. But lying in her childhood bed, surrounded by participation trophies from before she learned what she was capable of, Hannah allowed herself to imagine a future not defined by what she'd lost. She thought about the girl she'd been at 12, discovering wrestling and falling in love with the precision, the discipline, the way it rewarded control over chaos, patience over aggression, technique over strength. She'd spent 4 years trying to be someone who didn't need those skills, and it had almost destroyed her. Maybe the answer wasn't choosing between the wrestler and the gentle woman. Maybe they'd always been the same person, strong enough to restrain herself, gentle enough to choose peace, wise enough to know the difference between surrender and strategy. Hannah turned off the light and lay in darkness, listening to her parents' house settle around her. She wasn't the same person who'd left this room 8 years ago to pursue wrestling glory. She wasn't the same person who'd married Ryan, believing gentleness was the opposite of strength. She was someone new, someone who'd been tested and hadn't broken. Someone who discovered that real power wasn't in dominating others, it was in refusing to let others dominate you. Tomorrow, she'd start figuring out what that person looked like. Tonight, for the first time in 4 years, Hannah Brooks slept without being afraid. 6 months later, Hannah stood at the edge of a wrestling mat in Columbus, watching 12 teenage girls warm up. The gym smelled like decades of sweat and effort, familiar and grounding. 3 months of coaching at Westside Youth Wrestling had reminded her why she'd fallen in love with this sport. Coach Hannah, Mia Rodriguez, 15 with promising technique, jogged over. Can you show us that reversal from last week? Hannah smiled. Line up. We'll drill it. The girls assembled. Hannah walked them through the technique, body positioning, weight distribution, timing. Not explosive wrestling, but controlled wrestling. The kind that actually won matches. The key isn't strength, Hannah explained, demonstrating with Mia. It's patience. You wait for them to commit, then redirect their force. You're not fighting against them, you're using their energy. What if they're bigger? A younger girl asked. Then patience matters even more. Hannah executed the reversal slowly, showing exactly where her hands went. Bigger opponents rely on size. They expect you to match force with force. When you use technique instead, they don't know how to respond. Mia grinned. So you let them think they're winning, then flip the script? Exactly. Hannah stepped back. Now drill it. 20 reps each. While the girls practiced, Hannah observed. She could identify the ones like her at that age, quiet, uncertain, treating gentleness like a flaw. After practice, Sarah approached hesitantly. 14. Small for her weight class, constantly apologizing. Coach Hannah, my boyfriend says wrestling isn't feminine, that I should quit. Hannah's chest tightened with recognition. Look at me, Sarah. The girl met her eyes. Has wrestling made you weaker? No. Stronger. Less kind? No. Kinder. I'm less afraid, so I don't lash out. Less yourself? Sarah considered. It made me more myself. Then your boyfriend is wrong. Hannah's voice was gentle but firm. Strength and femininity aren't opposites. Neither are discipline and kindness. You decide what kind of woman you want to be. Make sure that decision is yours, not someone else's comfort. What if he breaks up with me? Then you'll know he never deserved you. After Sarah left, Coach Dana appeared, a knowing smile on her face. You're good at this. Better than as a competitor. I understand them better now. Hannah admitted. What it feels like to be told you're too much or not enough. How hard it is to trust your own strength when everyone's telling you it's wrong. Coach Dana joined her. You did that for 4 years, made yourself small for someone who convinced you that was love. I had to find myself on my own terms, Hannah said. Remember that gentle and weak aren't the same. That choosing peace isn't accepting disrespect. That silence is only surrender if you've given up, otherwise it's strategy. You sound like you've been thinking about this. 6 months of therapy will do that, Hannah smiled. Dr. Chen says I conflated my value with other people's perceptions. I never asked what Hannah expected. And now? Hannah watched the girls' finishing cool down, faces flushed with accomplishment. Now I know I'm allowed to be multiple things. Strong and gentle, disciplined and kind. Someone who knows how to fight and chooses not to unless necessary. I don't have to pick one identity. Coach Dana squeezed her shoulder. The Hannah I trained needed to hear that. The Hannah I was 6 months ago needed it more. Later, driving home to her one-bedroom apartment, minimal furniture, hers Hannah caught her reflection at a red light. She looked different, not younger or older, but more present. Like she'd stopped performing and started living. Her phone buzzed. Her lawyer. Divorce finalized. Congratulations. Hannah stared at congratulations. Was it congratulations to escape pain, or relief that pain had ended? Maybe both. At home, Hannah made dinner without feeling lonely. She'd spent years measuring her worth by Ryan's satisfaction. Eating alone had felt like failure. Now it felt like freedom. After dinner, she pulled out her old medals. She arranged them on her bookshelf, not hidden, not displayed with pride, just acknowledged. Evidence of who she'd been, what she'd accomplished, what she'd tried to abandon and reclaimed. The state championship medal caught the light. Hannah touched it gently, remembering the girl who'd won it fierce, focused, convinced strength was everything. That girl had been partially right. Strength was important, but discipline was more important. And knowing when not to use strength, that was wisdom. Her phone buzzed. Coach Dana, one of the mothers, asked if you'd run a women's self-defense workshop. Thought you might like it, Hannah considered. Teaching women how to defend themselves, recognize danger, respond with controlled force. Teaching them what she'd relearned, that defending yourself isn't aggression, it's self-respect. She typed, yes, I'd like that very much. Getting ready for bed, Hannah thought briefly about Ryan, wondered if he'd learned anything. If he understood that mistaking gentleness for weakness was dangerous, if he'd found someone else to diminish, then she decided she didn't care. Ryan's growth wasn't her concern. She'd spent 4 years managing his emotions. She was done carrying weight that wasn't hers. Hannah turned off the lights and lay in her own bed, in her own apartment, in a life she was building piece by piece. She wasn't the person who'd quit wrestling to become gentler. She wasn't the person who'd married believing submission was love. She wasn't even the person who defended herself 6 months ago. She was someone who understood that quiet didn't mean weak, that gentle didn't mean passive, that choosing peace was the strongest thing you could do until peace was no longer an option. Hannah closed her eyes and listened to the silence of a home where she didn't have to perform, didn't have to shrink, didn't have to pretend she was less. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of possibility. She was never weak. She was just choosing when to fight. And now, finally, she was fighting for herself.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Subscribe, like, and click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.